I want to welcome you to the Ask Jeff YouTube channel. Here's today's question. Why would taking the Lord's Supper in an unworthy manner cause someone to become sick or, quote, fall asleep, if it's nothing more than a merely symbolic ritual? How are we supposed to, quote, discern the Lord's body in the supper if he isn't actually present in it? 1 Corinthians 11, 29 and 30. Well, multiple layers here, and you talk about the presence of, lack thereof, symbolic. Obviously, there are multiple perspectives on what we know as the Lord's Supper. There is the traditional Roman Catholic Orthodox perspective of transubstantiation, that it actually becomes the body and the blood of Christ. There is the traditional Reformed and or Lutheran perspective, where it's consubstantiation, where the Spirit of God is more present in the Lord's Supper than outside of. And then there is typically referred to as today the symbolic interpretation, where it is merely a symbol. So the question is, if one sees it as symbolic, which by the way, I personally do, you don't have to, but I do, then how is taking the Lord's Supper in an unworthy manner cause one to be sick, or as 1 Corinthians says, fall asleep, which in biblical language means die? So I take this all the way back to the Old Testament. Now, work with me for a moment. In the Old Testament, one of the things the Bible said very clearly in Exodus chapter 20 and a host of other places is do not take the Lord's name in vain. Now, that's not merely a derogatory language that we hear often abbreviated with GD, although that is doing so. Taking the Lord's name in vain, if you look at it biblically, is speaking on behalf of the Lord when he did not speak. In other words, I would say today, when we say, well, God told me to tell you, well, if God didn't tell you to tell them, you're taking the Lord's name in vain. Now, what does that have to do with this? If you are not a believer in Jesus Christ, okay, or if you are a believer in Jesus Christ who is openly, admittedly, rebelliously, unapologetically living in sin, and then you honor the Lord's body by taking the Lord's Supper, even if symbolically, it's essentially taking the Lord's name in vain. And if I can say it this way, it's almost like you're slapping Jesus in the face. And that's a dangerous place to be in. You know, the Bible says that there's nothing we can do to add to our stature or add to our days. But you know, over and over and over, the Bible says that a foolish man can shorten his days. I would declare it's absolutely foolish to take the Lord's Supper in an unworthy manner, either a non-believer doing it just because you think you're supposed to, or a believer who's in abject rebellion against God doing so as a pretense and almost a hypocritical action. So therefore, I think you can reconcile symbolism and falling asleep and or becoming sick, because you're essentially responding directly opposed to, contrary to, and insulting the Lord to his face. Great question. If you have one, send to AskJeff.net. Have your question. See you tomorrow. Thanks for being a part of today's daily question. Now, we answer a question each and every day. Please feel free to submit a new question at AskJeff.net. We may not have gotten to yours today, but we eventually will continue to be a part of this. Subscribe so you don't miss out on a question every day.